Donald Trump has been talking about the policies he intends to pursue and the people who will hold top posts when he takes over on January the 20th. Among the names already announced is that of Tom Homan, who is to be Trump's border and immigration czar. The issue was cited as one of the top priorities of many voters on the campaign trail and a key reason for Trump's win. Trump could not have been clearer on the campaign trail that he intended to clamp down on illegal entry to the US and expel illegal migrants. This package from Emerald Maxwell.
Donald Trump made the announcement on his Truth Social network that Tom Homan, as his border czar, would be in charge of one of his signature campaign pledges.
And it'll be the largest deportation in the history of our country, and we have no choice.
In practice, Trump's plan will be obstacle-ridden. It's estimated that there are some 11 million people living illegally in the United States, 7 million of whom are known to the government. Nearly 80% of them have lived in the country for a decade or more. Immigrants who are in the country illegally have the right to due process before their removal, and a drastic increase in deportations would likely clog up the courts, which are already beset by backlogs. Trump also plans to use a 1798 wartime statute known as the Alien Enemies Act to rapidly deport alleged gang members, a law that was used during World War I and II to intern people of Japanese, German and Italian descent, and whose use would almost certainly be challenged in court. Trump's plan would furthermore require a huge law enforcement force, massive detention facilities, airplanes to move people, and nations to accept them. The president-elect told NBC News there is no price tag to implement the plan. In practice, the cost is likely to run into the tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars. The implications of such a policy could also fundamentally reshape the country's economic landscape. Unauthorized immigrants represent about 4.8% of the workforce. If the plan targets them, sectors like construction, housing and agriculture will be hit hard.
Well, I'm joined now here in the studio by Garret Martin, who is talking to me from the US. He's Senior Professional Lecturer and the Co-Director of the Transatlantic Policy Center at the American University in Washington. Hello, Mr. Martin. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here at France 24. Good to have you with us. Maybe we could begin just by taking a look at this appointment of Tom Homan as border security and immigration czar. Can you give us a bit about his background, what kind of person he is, what might we expect from him?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me today. So I think Tom Homan is someone who has multiple decades working in law enforcement and in border patrol. So I think that's an element here. He's also someone who served in a deportation role, important directing role under the Obama administration, which had quite a heavy record of deportations. And then, of course, he was acting head of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement under the Department of Homeland Security under Donald Trump. And famously or infamously, it was in his time that you had the zero tolerance policy that led to family separation. Crucially, Tom Homan, after leaving government, also served as a regular correspondent on Fox News, where he continued to be very critical of the Biden administration and essentially espousing the Trump sort of narrative about immigration. So I think that's someone who is definitely a loyalist, as well as someone who was involved in Project 2025.
The separating of children from their parents, there was an outcry over that policy, and in the end, Trump rescinded somewhat on it. This is several years on. This policy is hugely popular, was very popular in the campaign, the idea of deporting illegal migrants, even among some Democrat voters. Are we likely to see the separating of children from parents again, do you think?
It's not clear. I mean, some of, how this policy would be implemented, and the package video, I think, spoke to many of the significant logistical, moral, and economic challenges. But what we've heard from people like Tom Homan is like, this time, well, we won't have separation because we'll deport the whole family. The big issue here is, of course, you may have some people who are illegal immigrants, but who have been here for many years and who have children who are American citizens. And so that might lead, if you are not separating, you might lead to the mass deportation of people, but without any discriminating between people who are citizens and people who are not. That could certainly have huge potential for outcry, let alone the sort of the very nature of the policy.
Will, for example, Mexico take illegal immigrants from Mexico back? What about those who don't have any documentation at all? And what about those who are not Mexican but are from other countries?
Well, I think that's an excellent question here, because one of the elements that was hinted at in the video, and which is crucial, is it requires the goodwill of third parties, namely other countries, to be able to welcome back citizens. If it is, I mean, if there are people who are, for instance, hardened criminals, that will be interesting to see whether countries are willing to take them back. It's also the fact that you have an immigration that is very multifaceted in terms of the countries of origin, and includes countries like Venezuela, where the United States does not have good relations with the government in Caracas. So the challenges here, beyond even the other elements here of the logistics and even identifying people, will face significant diplomatic challenges.
And of course, since Trump was last in power, we now have a new president in Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum. Trump is threatening 25% tariffs on Mexican exports going into the United States. That is a very hefty part of Mexico's GDP. I mean, she's going to be under a lot of pressure to cooperate. And there are people suggesting that the Mexicans might, well, Mexico, the Mexican government might be very happy to have a tighter border between Mexico and the US, because Mexico is getting constant streams of migrants from further down, from South America, and it's creating a problem for Mexico. Do you think she might reach some sort of deal with him on this?
I mean, it's certainly possible. And you're absolutely right that Mexico also has to deal with the mass flow of people, especially from Central America. However, I think to complicate the picture, the Trump administration has threatened to put forward also the Remain in Mexico policy, which is basically having people who are applying for asylum have their cases or remain in Mexico until their cases are processed. If we are to expect this large deportation will also lead to a significant backlog amongst immigration courts, that could also mean having people staying in Mexico for prolonged periods. There's a huge human and economic cost for the Mexican government. Will Mexican public opinion also be particularly happy to have to deal with the ramification or the repercussions of the tariffs if they are imposed? So I think there may be a willingness in some respects to make a deal with the Trump administration, but there will be strong countervailing forces on the Sheinbaum administration as well.
We heard in our report there how back in the US, this would be an extremely expensive policy to pursue, trying to track down and expel all these illegal migrants, many of whom have settled, have jobs, as you say, might have children in the United States. Do you think, in terms of public opinion in the US, I know you follow it very closely, that Americans will be prepared to pay their tax dollars for an operation like that?
I think, because again, I think it's a very good point that this operation, if it's even talking about increasing by tenfold the number of deportations, so something more akin to 1 million people, it would take the better part of a decade to deal with the estimated 11 people who are in an illegal sort of situation. So this would be a prolonged economic cost over a long period of time. And so I can imagine that you're going to have significant pushback. It's going to mobilize people and, at the ballot box. So we might see consequences far earlier than that at the next midterm elections in 2026. And finally, it also requires the cooperation of so many different agencies, local enforcement. And we know that a number of big cities, have been sort of derided as sanctuary cities, but sort of the big democratic cities are not likely to cooperate. So even for that reason, that operation is likely to face significant roadblocks. The question is Trump really wanting to do this, or does he want to give the perception that he's trying, which is a very different element here?
Just finally, I heard in the campaigning just coming up to the election, I heard one voter saying that she would be voting Trump because he was the first person to publicly link crime with this uncontrolled border and migrants, undocumented migrants crossing over. And she said he was the first person to openly mention that and to link it and to raise the problem of fentanyl. Do you think the Democrats just refuse to address a problem and have suffered as a result?
Well, I think they did not address sufficiently the fact that immigration is one of those subjects that can really lead to people project fears and concerns. Is there a large amount of people crossing every day? Yes. Are there a lot of myth about immigration? Absolutely. 90%, I believe, of fentanyl that's smuggled into the United States is done through legal ports of entry and primarily by American citizens. Most people who are in an illegal situation enter legal ports of entry. They happen to overstay their visa. So there's certainly an element here of sort of fears and myths, but those are certainly constantly put forward. And in a period of, I think, broader social and economic anxiety, those sort of narratives or discourse tend to resonate. I think the Democrats' mistake was to not understand these anxieties, even if they're not entirely based in fact.
OK, well, we're out of time. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Garret Martin of the Transatlantic Policy Center in Washington. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us here on France 24. Thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.